close to 40 years, the John Birch Society has kept a watchful eye on the agendas and progression of the United Nations. The Society has one of the largest research facilities of its kind, which also houses countless articles and documents that analyze and detail UN activity. Using this information, along with commentaries from a host of authorities, some of which you are about to hear, the John Birch Society presents the United Nations, a look into the future.
I believe those individuals in this country, and there are plenty, who believe that we should have the right to own and bear arms, ought to be concerned with what's happening in the United Nations, because they are a threat to us. They would confiscate our guns. There have been proposals made at some of their conventions where they would literally repeal the Second Amendment. And I think that everybody should be alert to this and realize that this is not just fun and games, and this is just not a discussion club that we're dealing with.
I mean, the United Nations is an organization that, if anybody's interested in saving life, when they hear the name United Nations, they should run in the opposite direction.
The United Nations Treaty. And this is how the United Nations is beginning to limit our sovereignty, is through these types of treaties.
Individuals who believe in the right to own property ought to be concerned. Americans believe in that. They're careless about it. Sometimes they allow our governments to regulate too much and to tax us too much. But really, the right of private property ownership is severely threatened by our own government. But it's going to be a lot worse if the United Nations gets involved. There is no way that you can have the concept of private property right. They believe in welfare redistribution, socialist redistribution, everybody owns everything, and they would take from the wealthy and give to the poor to get an equal balance. Same old story that we've heard for years, but they do not protect the right to own private property by anything promoted by the United Nations.
The election process will become the task of world government monitors. The U.S. Congress, President, judicial system, and state and local government shall exist only as a facade to assure American citizens that they still have a voice in government. Checks and balances among branches of government will be eliminated. The states will become mere subdivisions of the national government, just as the national government will become a subdivision of the world government. The Bill of Rights portion of the U.S. Constitution will be superseded by the UN Convention on Civil and Political Rights. The U.S. Constitution will be supplanted by the UN Charter and consigned to the ash heap of history, a useless relic of the past. All other UN conventions will take effect. Appointed officials for state and local regions will be forced to comply with these international rules when representing their sectors. Following the pattern already established in China, only approved churches adhering strictly to government dictates regarding religion will be tolerated. All churches desiring to remain independent of government compliance will be disbanded, their houses of worship converted to other uses, or simply burned to the ground, and their pastors incarcerated. Churches submitting to government regulation will be forced to modify their beliefs to conform with the anti-Christian attitude of the almighty state. No exceptions will be allowed.
Brought into each country, into each religion, and there will be no choice because the whole thing is control. The entire basis of the one world religion is humanism. And humanism, when you take it back to its roots, is strictly atheism, paganism, and eventually, if you trace it back even further, you are actually right into the occult.
If United Nations has their way, there will be curtailment of our right to practice religion. They are not going to be believers in the right to practice our religions as we have seen fit throughout this country, and therefore those individuals who are interested in this subject certainly cannot be complacent about what the United Nations is doing.
It is certain that these new UN rules governing the American people won't come without resistance, but by then resistance will be futile. Citizens who attempt to defend whatever freedoms they have remaining will join the victims of the inevitable brutality and bloodbath carried out by a tyrannical UN dictatorship. For those still wondering if the United Nations would actually resort to such atrocities, consider for a moment the UN's lesser-known side. The United Nations organization was originally created by a small but powerful group of subversives as a future seat of a one-world government, camouflaged as the world's last hope for peace. And concealed by a barrage of self-generated propaganda, the UN has been responsible for some of the most controversial and violent acts of aggression in history. Since its founding in 1945, the UN has made gradual and significant progress toward the ultimate goal of its founders, world domination. Today, enormous in size and influence, the UN has a countless number of programs, agendas, and conventions ready to supersede the laws and practices of all nations, most certainly including the United States. To see the wisdom of what the John Birch Society has been saying for well over 3.5 decades. Get us out of the UN. March 20th, 1997, Capitol Hill. Texas U.S. Representative Ron Paul introduces one of the most crucial bills regarding the future of freedom, the American Sovereignty Restoration Act. Its purpose, to provide for complete withdrawal of the United States from the United Nations.
Well, I don't think we need the United Nations to be able to talk to other nations. The United Nations was established in 1945. We talked to a lot of nations before that. We have our embassies, we have our ambassadors, we can pick up a telephone these days and talk to whoever we want around the world. So I do not think that is a legitimate excuse. That is just an excuse to do the bad things that the United Nations does. Every year since we belonged to the United Nations, we have lost a little bit of our sovereignty. And we're moving in that direction where eventually we will not have the United States of America and will be nothing more than a pawn of the United Nations.
It didn't take long for word to get out. Soon, Dr. Paul's office received messages from other representatives willing to co-sponsor the bill, and an avalanche of congratulatory letters from the American people thanking him for introducing this crucial bill covered his desk. June 4th, 1997, 54 representatives vote in favor of the Get Us Out measure. A few years ago, it was unlikely if 4 representatives would have supported it. Even though the measure didn't pass, the numbers are a solid indicator of the accelerated support for the United States' immediate withdrawal from the UN. And with the help of more and more Americans, Congress will again be forced to vote whether or not to get us out of the United Nations for good.
The Congress tends to be political at times. They tend to respond to what they hear, and they think there's enough people in their district that want them to vote a certain way, they all of a sudden will become interested. The American people are starting to wake up. I think we're making a lot of progress, and I predict we're going to get a lot more votes next time.
Many Americans are working to influence Congress on important